Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of eDiscovery After Hours. My guest this week is Kassi Burns from King and Spaulding. This was a great episode. We talked about road trips, both domestically and in New Zealand. What it was like as she processed 9/11 from the other side of the globe. We talked about how Katrina happened during law school and what that experience was like for she and her husband, and some of the lessons that she's taken away from all of this adversity, right? To say nothing of COVID. I mean, she's had a lot of once in a lifetime experiences. And then we also talked about the eDiscoverist, which is the new TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram kind of play that she's making, and how she is telling people outside of the eDiscovery bubble about eDiscovery and what it is we do and why it matters. So this is a great episode. I know you're going to love it. Our sponsor this week is Discovery Master. Discovery Master helps law firms that are exposed to multiple relativity vendors track all of those document review projects in one place. No matter where your data is hosted, you log into Discovery Master, you can see all of those projects, when they're going to be done, how much it's cost, what are the key findings in the documents, and you don't have to remember which vendor is hosting which case and who's your PM and what are your login credentials and what data do they have on their dashboards. Check out www.discoverymaster.co for more. And thanks for tuning in.
Quick time!
You don't know how to drink, your whole generation.
Drinks on the house.
Yes, sir.
No, wait a second. Drinks are 50% off.
Right.
No, wait a second. Double the price of everything.
And I work only 16 hours a day.
A union man only works 8 hours a day.
I belong to 2 unions.
And now, eDiscovery After Hours with your host, Ryan Short.
Kassi, cheers. Welcome to eDiscovery After Hours.
Thank you so much for the invite. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. What are we working on here this evening?
Drink-wise, Topo Chico. Yep. How about you?
See, so I've got the bubbly because all you told me was that you were going to do water from a fancy glass.
Yeah.
And so I've got the water, but I didn't. I looked at the clock and it was like 60 seconds before we were supposed to do this, and I was working on a CLE, so there was no time to find a fancy glass.
You know what? We'll let it slide this time.
I appreciate that. When you come back for the next episode, it'll be grander, bigger, better all around.
Okay, good. I'm going to hold you to it. So thank you.
So you know what's fun is that the day this episode comes out, you're going to be in San Diego.
San Diego?
Scholars maintain, yeah. So you're going to have like way more fun, like with way more great people. We should be doing, on location live, but this will suffice for now.
Right. And we can have maybe live toasts while watching the episode. So maybe do that.
Yeah, I dig that. Well, it is very good to meet you. This is basically our first time talking, although this is technically the third time because we tried to start the Zoom meeting twice. My new laptop wasn't being polite. So you're a great sport. And it is very good to speak with you. I'm glad to have you on the show. So Kassi Burns, where are you? Are you down in Dallas?
I'm in Fort Worth, technically. There is a difference for those of us in the DFW area. So Tarrant County resident, Fort Worth, Texas. But in the DFW area.
Now, is one like supposedly better than the other? Like, is there a rivalry? Well, if there is it a friendly rivalry?
It is a rivalry, and I guess it would be friendly. And Fort Worth is definitely the better of the two. And then Fort Worth and Dallas will combine in its rivalry against Houston. Yeah. So that's how that kind of plays out. But yeah.
Now, are you a Texan native?
I am. I grew up from in a very small town, just about 45 minutes northwest of Fort Worth. So I grew up just going to Fort Worth all the time. Going to the zoo for your kindergarten trip in Fort Worth. So yeah.
Heard that. I grew up 45 minutes north of Indianapolis, where I am now. And It's funny, when I was even a senior in college, I would come to downtown Indy and I would get lost. I mean, could not find my way out, which is really embarrassing because it's a grid. And also it's
you would
really
do
small.
Horribly in New Orleans, though. I mean,
Yes.
New Orleans is like so confusing. So if you got lost in a grid, goodness, Ryan. Thank goodness for Google Maps, I guess, right?
I mean, so when I moved, I bought a smartphone my senior year of college because I was moving to Chicago afterwards. I don't know how people moved to new cities before smartphones, but you did at least twice because you did law school in New Orleans and then not in New Orleans and then back in New Orleans, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And in I think in undergrad, you went abroad, right?
Well, I went abroad in between my undergrad and law school. I went to undergrad at a small university in Arkansas called Henderson State University, and got to know some Rotarians involved with like Rotaract, kind of like the college Rotary Club, and ended up being awarded a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship, which let me go study in New Zealand for a year. And I studied MBA courses in film and Maori culture courses while I was there. So yes, did that without a cell phone. It's horrible. It's crazy to think about it now. And that was my first time flying ever. Because
Really?
my family and I, we always were kind of like the Griswolds. We drove everywhere, Colorado or Florida or South Dakota. And it was my first time flying, and I flew by myself, and it was a really great trip, great time. Still in pretty close contact with my friends that I've met there. So it was a great little getaway.
Oh, that's amazing. All right. So there's a lot of different threads that I want to pull. So first you mentioned, right, so you grew up small town outside of Fort Worth, and you guys were the Griswolds. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
What was the longest road trip you ever took, and/or your favorite road trip you ever took?
So the longest was we did a loop from our hometown in North Texas and drove all the way up to South Dakota. So like the Badlands, and saw, the presidents and everything, Mount Rushmore. My grandmother traveled with us too. So, and then we looped down through Colorado and New Mexico. So it was a big loop, about a week and a half. And I remember the whole O.J. Simpson thing was happening. So we were all of course you didn't have smartphones, so you had to look at the paper or like get to your hotel and see what was there. So we were very anxious and interested in what was going on in the O.J. Simpson saga. And I just remember us when we were driving up to South Dakota, we got very excited when we saw the largest ball of twine, because there really wasn't a lot of other stuff to see. So we have to pull over and take a photo of the ball of twine. And we went to the geographical center of the continental U.S. in Kansas. So those were two things we were very excited about. And then, of course, the Badlands were very cool, and South Dakota was great. And we grew up always going to Colorado. So that was all fun. But that was a really, really good trip, just because it was bizarre in a lot of ways and long at the same time. But yeah, that is definitely top of the list.
Do you still like road trips?
No, I always got car sick. So,
No.
And I'm a reader, and I could never read because I would get car sick. So, and I was the youngest, so I was sitting in the middle. I hated it. I hated just the long drive. These kids these days, they don't know how lucky they are. Yeah, I can't believe I said that. But yeah, no. How about you? Do you like to drive, or do you prefer flying?
I don't mind. I like driving. If I'm in a car, I want to drive. I don't like riding shotgun or being in the back seat. And growing up, so I'm the oldest of 5. So we always drove places because, it's like you have to take out a mortgage to fly a family of 7 people anywhere.
Exactly.
And so my father was a physician. He was used to working crazy hours. So I grew up in Muncie, Indiana, and he would put us in the car at like 6 p.m. on a Friday, and just drive through the night down to Orlando, right, for a Disney trip or whatever. And you'd wake up at like 7 a.m. and the sun is in your face coming through the minivan windows, and you're in southern Georgia, and you still have like 9 hours to go, and you just hate your life. But then you meet Mickey Mouse, and so it's fine. But yeah, so what's funny is we're going to the mountains of northern Georgia here in about 2 months. And so it's a 9-hour drive if you're adults. Right. So for us, what that looks like is we leave our house about 5 a.m. We drive for 3 hours. We stop and we get out at a rest stop and feed the kids breakfast and let them run around like maniacs for 45 minutes. We put them back in the car. We do 3 more hours and then we stop and we do the same thing for lunch outside Chattanooga.
Wow.
You start in Indy, you break south of Cincy, you break north of Chattanooga, and then 3 more hours and you're there. So it becomes a 12-hour trip. Here's how crazy I am. I actually Googled, I mean, you could look at my browser history and you'll still see all of the crazy math and triangulation I was doing. I was trying to figure out if we could make it work because we got to get out to Scottsdale, Arizona this summer to see my wife's grandma. And I was like, could we drive from Indy to Georgia to Scottsdale back to Indy? And I just realized it's worth taking out the second mortgage for the airlines.
Yeah,
I can't.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be quite a drive. And I just, you talking about your trip, it made me remember that the longest road trip I actually took was my last month in New Zealand. My flatmates and I, we just, traveled around the islands, the South and then the North Island. And one of my flatmates had bought a car whenever she got there. And it was just like an old beater, just a complete POS that college students were flying in and buying and then selling and buying and selling and buying and selling. No way it had a CD player. So it had a tape deck. But only one tape would play, and it was a Pretty Woman soundtrack.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So we played that tape, that cassette tape, frontward to back, flip it, frontward to back, over and over so much that the tape got so thin when you played it, you could hear the other side playing in reverse. So it sounded fairly demonic, but we couldn't, we wanted to listen to it. So that was a weird, great trip as well. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh,
and we
my
called her
goodness.
Miss Piggy. That was the name of the car. She was Miss Piggy. But
so, all right. We hinted at, but you started and ended law school in New Orleans.
Mhm.
And the reason is because you were there during Katrina.
Yes.
So I actually had Drew Gullitz from Avalon on a few episodes ago, and I've had another guest who spent time in New Orleans as well, whose name escapes me at the moment. I'll have to look back through the list, but talk about what it was like being there during that time and what your experiences were. And obviously, thank God that you're okay. Hopefully your friends and family all came through okay. But tell us about that.
So my husband and I, we were living kind of in the suburbs in Jefferson Parish, and I was actually supposed to go volunteer with the animal rescue group that morning. And so because it was really originally supposed to hit the panhandle of Florida, so it was completely off our radar. And so on a Saturday morning, I was, checking my email, and the head person of the group I volunteered with said, "Hey, Kassi, we're canceling it. You guys need to get out of the city. It's bad." And so, I went up to the school to get my books because I didn't have all my books with me. And I tend to prepare for the worst. So I thought, let me get, my books and everything just so I have them all with me. And I remember going up to the school and there was a huge line of cars on campus. And evacuating from hurricanes always stressed me out. So I saw that. And you're used to hurricane traffic, but it's always like on the interstate or the main roads. And at first I thought that was just evacuation traffic, but then I realized it was freshman students being dropped off by their parents at their dorm. And so that was just like mind blowing to me, but got my books, went back to our apartment, and my husband was doing laundry. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, Damon, no, you can't do laundry. Like, who cares about laundry right now? We just need to put our stuff in the car and, get our dogs and go," because just a 2-hour difference and when you leave can be the difference between a 4 and an 8-hour drive that would normally be an hour and a half. So, we left, we stayed. His sister was living in Natchitoches, Louisiana at the time. And then when we saw how bad, it was when the levees broke, I instantly knew it was bad. And so just started calling schools and saying, like, if we need to come visit you for a semester, or, where can we go and not have to spend money because, you just don't, we had no idea what was going on. We had no idea like what the state of things were going to be. So it was just, let's have a plan of action where we're not having to spend money, because we didn't even know if our apartment was okay, which luckily it was. But I ended up studying for a semester at University of Arkansas in Little Rock. I knew some attorneys who lived in Little Rock from a professor I worked for in my undergrad, and was able to stay with them. And they were able to get me, just a semester job at a law firm. And then my husband, he works in the sign business, and he went back to New Orleans and worked there because everyone was wanting signs of like in business, out of business, all that kind of stuff. So some people he worked with, their house got completely flooded, and they ended up living with him while I was in Little Rock, which was good because he, didn't need to be there. But he was there when it was really bad, and there were, Army helicopters flying around, and it was over a year later, and if it rained, the electricity would go out just like that. So I had friends that had to, when we came back, because we came back that spring semester, unless you had an extreme hardship, to prevent having to come back, especially for us as 3Ls. A lot of people went to their home, and Tulane is very much a national school. It's not just a local school. Yeah. But I had friends that, their place got flooded. And so they had to be put up in cruise ships they brought in from Greece or something like that, because there was a housing shortage. But it was a rough place to live. We lived there for 2 years after I graduated, and it was a rough city to live in, those 2 years after. There's a lot of crime that popped up. And so, you were hearing, saw the news about all the people being affected by the storm, which is horrible to hear, and just all the crime. It was hard, but New Orleans is a resilient city, so and I love going to visit. And we were there. I was there in the fall for a reunion, but it was kind of crazy. But I was also in New Zealand when 9/11 happened, so it was just like weird, and that was a very weird experience. So
what was that like, seeing it from as an American, but on the complete other side of the globe?
I mean, it was very distressing because you just didn't know when you would get to go home. You didn't know how bad it, especially like the first day or two, you didn't know if it was just, there was more coming, and will you be able to get home if you want to? And it was kind of weird experiencing that kind of grief, even though, I am very fortunate I didn't lose anyone, but you see it happening, and how can you not have grief for people just going to work and they died? Like, it's just horrible. And not being able to share that as a nation, like being very far removed from that. And also you nearly became a spokesperson for the country when you would run into people, like they would ask you questions. And honestly, like, I just didn't want to talk about it. It just was like very sad and depressing, of course, to have seen and experienced that. But it was just very surreal. And, flying home, and then, flying home, and the airport's just like barely anybody was on the plane, and it just was completely different. So,
you've had enough, you've had enough once in a lifetime experiences for anybody, between Katrina, 9/11 at all, let alone abroad and trying to get home. COVID. I mean, let's hope that the next couple of decades are very boring.
Yeah. Well, I think what it does is it's taught me just to be able to like roll with the punches and like, okay, let's go into like, how are we going to respond to this and move on? Like, keep moving forward. And it lets you be, at least for me, and I do think that has had an impact on my career in eDiscovery and litigation, because there are things that just kind of blow up out of nowhere. And like the brain just instantly starts thinking of, how am I going to respond to this? What's my plan of action? Like, let me triage and go forward. And some people, they kind of can shut down. And I've never really had that problem. It's always like, okay, hyper focus. What do I need to do to deal with this issue and move on? So, in some ways it's good. And I think also it's let me learn grace in a lot of ways, when people are offering to help you, like with Katrina, and a lot of times you don't like taking help from people, but there are times you just need to. And then it also, when you're in a better position in life, being the one to extend that grace to other people. So, was not easy at the time. I'm very happy to be past those periods of my life, but it definitely is, character building. So I always did think I had the worst law school story in history. Now these, all these students like going through COVID, I think it's just like horrible that they're having to go through that. So
absolutely. Oh, wild. So did you know, when did you know that you were going to be an attorney? When did that become your path?
I think when I studied in New Zealand, I was working on an MBA and I hated it. I just was, I hated it.
She says to the MBA podcast host.
Sorry. I just, and I think like in all fairness, I'd never been out in the corporate world. I went straight from undergrad to an MBA program. So to me, there was a little bit of redundancy from the theoreticals, and I didn't have that practical to have it really like intrigue me. And so I, came home and I knew I wanted to do a postgraduate degree. And I honestly was a little cavalier about it. I said, well, I know I don't want to be a doctor because I can't handle blood. But let me just take the LSAT, and, I'm not going to really study for it. Like, c'est la vie. Like if it's meant to be, I'll do decent enough to get, into a good school. And that was really my approach to it. So it was, not the smartest thing, in later in life, you sometimes go, man, I really wish I had that hot tub time machine, because it's not an inexpensive venture to look into. And there have been times in my professional career where you do have periods of regret, but being on the other side of it, I'm glad I did go this path, but really wish I maybe had prepared for the LSAT or other things a little bit more seriously. But, that it just kind of fell into it, similar to like falling into eDiscovery. You just kind of like go, oh, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So, yeah.
Speaking of eDiscovery, I first became aware of you when you had this thing on LinkedIn that was super intriguing called the eDiscoverist. Yeah. And I've gotten a lot of compliments for the eDiscovery After Hours logo because it's just different than a lot of the kind of like staid corporate traditional, wood paneling, mahogany kind of aura.
You're speaking right to my heart. Or like, that's exactly something I wanted to do with eDiscoverist. Whenever I, started playing around with the concept of wanting to do something from a social media perspective, I really wanted to be very far removed from those traditional visual keys that you see in the legal profession or even the tech profession, like the blue laser or whatever, like the glowing. That's all great, but I just feel like there's a level of, there's more to it. There are a lot of diverse people who work in eDiscovery with diverse interests, and we're all, I think, pretty interesting people. And, there's nothing wrong with like embracing your femininity or anything like that, So that's where a lot of my inspiration kind of came from. And there's the visual image I have is of a woman, Ada Lovelace, because she is considered, one of the first, she talked about algorithms back in the 1800s or whatever. Right. So, why not like lean into that? Why don't we have women in STEM? How come eDiscovery isn't a part of that? Anyway, so really whenever I started to conceptualize, what I wanted the visual elements of this idea to be, I wanted to really lean into the feminine, type of design and logo. So, yeah.
Well, I love the content that I've seen you put out. I love the kind of the branding, the positioning that you have. Tell me a little bit more about like what is the eDiscoverist? What's your elevator pitch when people ask you about it? And what do you hope that it becomes? Because it's still fairly new. And it was almost like you got it. It was almost like a false start, right?
It was. I got it up and I nearly was about to launch it. And then I started my job at K&S and I really needed to focus on that. And then I had to sit for the Texas bar in February. And during that time of very intense, I was still working and then, working 8 to 10 hours and studying 4 to 5 hours a day, just, nonstop. And I needed a creative outlet because I was just about to kind of lose my mind. And that's kind of where my brain went and I reconfigured what I wanted it to be. So for me, when I first thought of eDiscoverist, I wanted it to be a place that really wasn't specific about a certain type of software or anything. It really is just nearly like a community for those of us in the practice to kind of talk about things that are interesting that intersect with eDiscovery, because we deal with a lot of technology that, Meta uses and Google uses and Twitter, like all of these tech companies use. So I see articles about AI in music, AI creating music or AI creating art, and my brain always there's a wiggle in my brain, my little eDiscovery brain going, I wonder what would that look like, if we were to use that in eDiscovery. So I think that there are probably a lot of other people who do that too. We don't just talk about privilege and things about that, or at least I think of how our technology intersects with the broader world. And so I saw it as maybe a platform of that, or even just to kind of talk about spicier things like the Real Housewives and all of their discovery issues, because there have been a lot of housewives that have had probably some discovery issues. And yes, I do watch the series purely for professional reasons. But also, I really wanted it to be an opportunity to the end goal of, and it's very lofty end goal of, maybe there'll be a day where I don't have to describe to people what my job is. So, what this little, nugget of the legal profession is, because no one knows. So really then it turns to a non-practitioner audience outreach of explaining what it is and why you should maybe be kind of interested in it, because it may affect you personally in your career at some point, or it could be a career path that is very interesting to you that you can make pretty good money. You don't have to have a JD. You can work from home in with a lot of places. And that's really, I think, my hope is to create that awareness and that dialogue so people, more people can know about it. So that's kind of where my mind went with using TikTok, because I just think that our attention spans have all gotten much shorter. People don't read blogs. Now it's really like blog vis-a-vis a vlog, a 15-second vlog. So that's kind of where I've reimagined it in that interim period of false start and restarting it.
Yeah. So it's on TikTok, it's on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else people can find it?
It's on Instagram too. And I'm honestly just creating the content in TikTok and reposting other places because I'm too lazy to be more thoughtful in that regard, or maybe don't have enough time. But yes, any of those places it's available.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Kassi, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to meet you. And I look forward to many more enlightening eDiscoverist knowledge drops.
Thank you. And I look forward to photos from your family vacation, to Florida. So
there you go.
Or Cheers. Georgia, excuse me. Cheers.